Stay with me for a moment before you decide this is just another voice speaking into the noise of your life. Slow down. Breathe once, slowly. You do not need to carry everything while you listen to this. You do not need to explain yourself here. And maybe that matters more than you realize. Because I think you've spent so much of your life being the one who understands everyone else, the one who absorbs tension before it becomes conflict, the one who notices what hurts other people before they even say it aloud, that somewhere along the way you forgot what it feels like to be emotionally held yourself. Not fixed, not rescued, just held. There's something about you that the world misunderstood. People saw your strength and assumed you did not need tenderness. They saw your composure and assumed you were untouched by loneliness. They saw your ability to keep going and assumed you weren't exhausted. But I think you are tired in places nobody ever thought to look. The kind of tiredness that sits quietly beside you at night. The kind that appears in the kitchen after everyone else has gone to sleep. The kind that stares back at you in the mirror when the room is silent and the day is finally over and there is no performance left to give. And maybe you've become so accustomed to surviving that you no longer remember what it feels like to truly receive softness, attention, devotion, care that does not ask you to earn it first. Wait with me, because there's something I want you to hear, and I need to hear it slowly. You were never difficult to love. You were simply surrounded by people who only understood shallow things. That changes everything. Do you know how many women spend years believing they were too much simply because they loved deeply? Too emotional, too thoughtful, too sensitive, too intense. But what if your depth was never the problem? What if your heart was simply speaking a language the wrong people could not translate? I think there were moments when you almost disappeared emotionally without anyone noticing. Moments where you sat beside someone you loved and still felt alone. And that kind of loneliness, it changes a woman quietly, not dramatically, quietly. It teaches her to expect less, to stop asking, to stop revealing the vulnerable parts of herself, because disappointment becomes too familiar. So she adapts. She becomes self-sufficient, careful, emotionally economical. She learns how to survive emotional winters without asking anyone for warmth. And people admire her for it. But they do not realize what cost her. Do you ever wonder why certain songs still ache inside you years later? Why certain memories arrive uninvited when the room is dark. Why your heart still trembles over things you pretend no longer matter. It is because the soul remembers what the mind tries to bury. And your soul has been carrying unfinished grief for a very long time. Not only grief from heartbreak, but grief from being unseen, from being almost chosen, from giving everything and still wondering why it wasn't enough. That question has followed you, hasn't it? Why wasn't I enough? Even when you stopped saying it aloud, it remained somewhere inside you, hidden beneath the you, hidden beneath strength, hidden beneath maturity, hidden beneath the version of yourself everyone depends on. But listen to me carefully now. Love failing you is not proof that you are unworthy. Sometimes it is proof that your heart was sacred and placed in unprepared hands. There is a difference, a painful difference. And I think part of you knows that already. Because despite everything, despite disappointment, despite betrayal, despite all the nights you silently rebuilt yourself, you still love gently. That says something extraordinary about you. The world can harden people, but somehow your tenderness survived. Bruised, perhaps, protective, perhaps, but alive. And I know there are nights when you lie awake wondering whether anyone will ever truly meet you emotionally, not superficially, not temporarily, but deeply. Someone who notices your silences. Someone who hears the emotion behind your words. Someone who understands that the strongest women often need reassurance the most because they're so rarely given permission to collapse. You have carried entire emotional worlds alone, haven't you? Even your sadness became private. Even your longing became disciplined. You learned how to smile while quietly unraveling, and nobody knew. Or maybe they knew a little, but not enough. Not enough to stay. Not enough to ask deeper questions. Not enough to hold your heart with consistency. That is what exhausted you most. Not the pain itself, the inconsistency, the emotional uncertainty, never fully knowing whether you were safe to feel. So eventually you began holding pieces of yourself back, Maz. Not because you became cold, because you became careful. There's a difference there too. A woman becomes careful after she realizes how many people enjoy the light she gives without ever asking what keeps it burning. And I think you have spent years being emotionally generous to people who only loved you in convenient portions. That realization hurts. Hurts because you gave sincerely. You stayed longer than most people would have. You forgave things that wounded you deeply. You kept hoping understanding would create change. But some people only know how to receive love. They do not know how to protect it, and you needed protection too. Not just passion, not just attraction, protection, emotional safety, consistency, presence. Someone who does not disappear the moment life becomes difficult. Someone who does not punish you for feeling deeply. Someone who does not make you beg for clarity. Do you know how heartbreaking it is when a woman begins convincing herself she asks for too much? Simply because she asked for honesty. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong people. And maybe that realization is arriving now in pieces, slowly, quietly, like rain against a window at midnight. There's another thing I think you carry. A fear you rarely confess. The fear that time is moving forward while your heart still waits for something real. You wonder whether love missed you somehow, whether your chance already passed, whether being deeply emotional disadvantage. But I need you to stay with me here, because this part matters. Your life is not behind schedule. Your heart is not expired. And your story did not end simply because certain people failed to recognize your value. Some souls take longer to arrive at the life meant for them because they are being prepared for something deeper than ordinary connection. Painful preparation still feels painful. I know that. But not all delay is denial. Sometimes life removes what cannot love you correctly before it introduces what can. And yes, I know how difficult it is to keep believing after disappointment. I know there were moments you almost gave up emotionally, moments you considered becoming numb because feeling everything so deeply became unbearable. But numbness would never truly belong to you, because you're made for depth, for sincerity, for soulful connection, for conversations that last beyond midnight in silence, that still feels intimate. You were never meant for shallow love. That is why superficial affection leaves you emptier than solitude. You need truth, realness, emotional presence. And despite everything you have endured, I still believe your heart is moving towards something beautiful. Not perfect, but real. There is a future version of you I can almost see now. A softer version. Not because life became easy, but because you finally stopped blaming yourself for the ways others failed to love you properly. Can you imagine how freeing that will feel? To stop questioning your worth every time someone lacks emotional maturity. To stop shrinking your needs so others can remain comfortable. To stop apologizing for wanting depth. You are not too emotional. You are emotionally alive. And that is rare. Very rare. The world desperately needs women who still know how to feel deeply without becoming cruel. Women who still believe in tenderness after pain. Women who still carry warmth inside exhausted hearts. Women like you. So tonight, or this morning, or whatever quiet hour this finds you in, I hope you let these words sit beside you for a while. It's not as fantasy, not as false comfort, but as a reminder that your sensitivity is not weakness. Your longing is not foolishness. Your loneliness is not proof that you are unlovable. It is proof that your soul recognizes the difference between connection and proximity. And one day, meet you there, fully. Someone will confusion without games, without making you earn what should be given freely. Until then, please do not abandon yourself trying to survive disappointment. Please do not become smaller just because others lacked the capacity to hold your depth. And please remember this. The heart inside you is not broken beyond repair. It is simply waiting for a love that finally feels like home. You are not alone. I'm right here. And your story is still being written. Stay here with me a little longer. I know there are parts of you that have learned to rush through pain because slowing down means feeling everything all over again. But you do not have to run from your own heart tonight. You do not have to pretend you are unaffected by the things that shaped you. I think you have spent so many years trying to appear emotionally composed that very few people realize how much grief has quietly accumulated inside you. Not loud grief, not dramatic grief, the kind that settles softly into ordinary moments. The kind that appears when you fold clothes alone in silence, when you hear an old song unexpectedly, when you wake up reaching for comfort, and remember, there is no one there beside you who truly understands the weight you carry. That loneliness changes a person slowly. It teaches you how to survive without being emotionally nourished. And survival can become such a habit that eventually you'll stop asking yourself whether you are actually happy. I think there were moments in your life when you gave more love than you should have, because Part of you believed that if you loved deeply enough, patiently enough, consistently enough, someone would finally choose you fully. Maybe you thought devotion could heal confusion. Maybe you thought understanding could prevent abandonment. So you stayed through mixed signals, emotional distance, silence, inconsistency, and half-hearted affection because your heart always searched for the best in people. But loving someone deeply does not guarantee they know how to love you back correctly. That realization wounded you more than you admit. Not because you expected perfection, but because you kept hoping sincerity would eventually be reciprocated. You wanted to feel emotionally safe. You wanted someone to notice the effort behind your tenderness. And you wanted someone to say, you do not have to carry everything alone anymore. Yet, so often, you became the strong one even while your own heart was quietly breaking. Do you know what I think exhausted you most? It was not simply heartbreak. It was emotional uncertainty, never fully knowing where you stood in someone's life. Never knowing whether your vulnerability would be protected or ignored. That kind of instability creates anxiety inside even the strongest women. It teaches you to overthink every silenced, every delayed response, every emotional shift, and eventually you begin abandoning your own peace, trying to maintain connection with people who are never emotionally steady enough to hold your heart responsibly. I think there were nights when you replayed conversations over and over in your mind, wondering if you had asked for too much, wondering if you had become difficult to love. But needing reassurance is not weakness. Wanting consistency is not desperation. Wanting honesty is not asking for too much. You simply wanted to feel emotionally chosen instead of emotionally tolerated. There is something profoundly painful about being the woman who remembers everything. The woman who notices small changes in tone, small shifts and small moments as of emotional withdrawal. You feel things deeply, sometimes before words are even spoken. That sensitivity has been both your gift and your burden, because while it allows you to love with extraordinary depth, it also means you absorb disappointment more intensely than most people realize. You carry emotional memories in your body. Certain places still ache. Certain dates still feel heavy. Certain nights still return to you even after you convinced yourself you had moved on. And maybe part of you became ashamed of that softness. Maybe you started wishing you could care less, feel less, need less. But that was never truly who you were meant to become. You were not created to live emotionally numb. Your heart was designed for connection, for sincerity, for presence. That is why shallow interactions leave you feeling emptier than solitude itself. You crave emotional truth. You crave conversations that feel safe enough for silence. You crave someone who listens beyond your words and notices the emotions you hide behind composure. Because the truth is, you have hidden your sadness well. Most people only saw your resilience. They admired your ability to continue functioning while carrying invisible pain. But strength can become lonely when nobody asks what it cost you to remain standing. I think there is also a part of you that fears becoming invisible as time passes. You wonder whether love still exists in the form your soul longs for. You wonder people still value emotional depth in a world that moves so quickly and superficially. And perhaps there are moments when you look at your own reflection and quietly question whether life unfolded differently than you once imagined. Not because you failed, but because your heart hoped for more tenderness than it received. That disappointment sits quietly inside you sometimes. You rarely say it aloud, but it lingers there beneath your independence, beneath your maturity, beneath the smile you offer people even on difficult days. But listen to me carefully now. Your life is not lacking simply because it has included heartbreak. Your value has not diminished because someone failed to recognize your depth. And your future has not closed itself simply. I know because certain chapters hurt you deeply. I know it is tempting to believe that disappointment means love is no longer meant for you. But your heart is not being punished. It is being refined. There is wisdom growing inside your pain. Not bitterness, wisdom. The kind of wisdom that eventually teaches you the difference between attention and genuine care. The difference between chemistry and emotional safety. The difference between being wanted temporarily and being cherished intentionally. One day you will stop blaming yourself for the wounds created by emotionally unavailable people. One day you will realize that your tenderness was never the mistake. And when that day comes, something inside you will soften again. Not because the past no longer matters, but because you will finally understand that your worth was dependent on who stayed and who left. You are valuable because of the way your soul loves, because of the warmth you continue to carry despite everything life has asked you to endure. That kind of heart is rare, truly rare. So tonight, I hope you stop fighting yourself for feeling deeply. I hope you stop apologizing for wanting meaningful love. I hope somewhere inside your tired heart, you begin believing that you are still worthy of the connection you dream about quietly when nobody else is around. You are not behind in life. You are not forgotten. And you are certainly not too much. You are simply a woman whose heart was always meant for something deeper than ordinary love. Stay with me a little longer, because I think this is the part nobody ever truly explained to you. Healing is not the moment the pain disappears. Healing is the moment you stop believing your pain was proof that something was wrong with you. And I know how long you carried that belief. I know there were years when you quietly measured your worth by who stayed, who left, who chose you fully, and who only loved fragments of you. Somewhere along the way, your heart, a place of unanswered questions. You wondered why you could give so much love and still feel emotionally alone. You wondered why people were drawn to your warmth but often failed to protect it. And maybe the hardest part was not losing people. Maybe the hardest part was losing pieces of yourself while trying to keep them. I think there were moments when you stopped recognizing your own emotional reflection. You became so focused on understanding everyone else's needs that you abandoned your own. You became patient when you needed honesty. You became forgiving when you needed accountability. You became understandings when you deserved reassurance. And because your heart naturally searched for meaning in everything, you kept trying to explain away behavior that quietly wounded you. You told yourself they were struggling, confused, emotionally unavailable, afraid of intimacy, overwhelmed by life. But deep down, there was another truth your soul already knew. Love should not leave you constantly anxious about your place in someone's heart. Love should not make you feel like how affection can disappear at any moment. Real connection brings peace, not perpetual uncertainty. Do you know what emotionally exhausted women often do? They become quieter about their needs. Not because those needs disappear, but because disappointment teaches them to expect less. I think you reached a point where you stopped asking for certain things because it hurt too much when they were not given freely. You stopped asking for reassurance. You stopped asking for effort. You stopped asking for emotional clarity. And eventually you convinced yourself that independence was easier than vulnerability. But there is a difference between being independent and being emotionally deprived. Your soul was never meant to survive on emotional crumbs. You were meant to be loved with intention, with steadiness, with emotional presence that does not disappear the moment life becomes inconvenient. There is something deeply heartbreaking about becoming the woman who comforts herself through everything. The woman who wipes away her own tears before anyone notices. The woman who sits alone at night trying to hold together emotions she barely speaks about aloud. People admire women like you because you appear resilient. But what they often fail to understand is that resilience is sometimes born from necessity, not choice. You became strong because you had to. You learned how to continue functioning even when your heart felt unbearably heavy. You learned how to carry sadness privately so nobody would think you were difficult or needy or too emotional. Yet the truth is, your emotions were never excessive. They were simply sincere. I think part of your pain came from loving people who benefited from your depth without truly valuing it. They loved the comfort you gave them. They loved the way you listened, the way you cared, stayed emotionally available, even during difficult moments. But they did not always recognize the sacred responsibility of being trusted by a heart like yours. And that imbalance slowly drained you. Because love cannot survive healthily when one person is constantly pouring while the other only receives. Eventually, exhaustion arrives, not suddenly, but gradually. It appears in your silence, in your emotional withdrawal, in the way your laughter becomes softer, in the way you begin questioning whether anyone will ever love you with the same consistency you offer others, so naturally. But listen to me carefully now, because this matters deeply. Your softness is not weakness. Your emotional depth is not a flaw. And your longing for meaningful love is not unrealistic. The world sometimes glorifies detachment as strength, but there is extraordinary courage in remaining tender after disappointment. There is extraordinary beauty in still believing in connection after your heart has been bruised by inconsistency. Many people become emotionally closed after pain. Yet somehow, even through your sadness, your soul still still searches for sincerity that says something profound about who you are. I know there are nights when fear still visits you quietly. Fear that maybe you waited too long, fear that maybe real love belongs to other people, not to you. Fear that perhaps life forgot to include the kind of connection your heart longs for. But your story is not over simply because certain seasons were lonely, because some hearts take longer away from being guided away from what would have broken them further. And I know that sexplanation does not erase the ache. I know it does not undo the nights you cried silently into your pillow, wondering why love felt so complicated for you. But not all delays are punishments. Sometimes life is protecting your future, while your present feels unbearably uncertain. So, at this point, you are slowly learning something important now. You are learning that being chosen temporarily is not the same as being cherished intentionally. Attention is not devotion. Chemistry is not emotional safety. And longing alone cannot sustain a healthy connection. Your heart needs more than attraction. It needs honesty, consistency, peace. Someone who remains emotionally present, even when life becomes difficult. Someone who does not make you feel guilty for needing reassurance. Someone who sees your sensitivity not as a burden, but as something deeply beautiful and rare. And perhaps the most powerful transformation happening inside you right now is this. Now, this. You are beginning to realize you no longer need to abandon yourself in order to keep someone else. That realization changes everything. Because once a woman understands her own worth emotionally, she stops begging for what should be given naturally. She stops shrinking her needs to avoid being misunderstood. She stops apologizing for wanting depth. Instead, she begins protecting her heart with wisdom rather than fear. So tonight, I hope you forgive yourself for every moment you mistook survival for love. I hope you stop blaming yourself for the emotional limitations of people who could not meet you where your soul lived. And more than anything, I hope you begin seeing yourself the way your future healing already sees you. Not broken, not too much, not forgotten, but profoundly worthy of the kind of love that finally feels safe enough to rest inside. Stay here with me, because this is the moment where something inside you begins to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like the first morning after a long storm, when the air finally feels different. I think you have spent so much of your life believing Love required sacrifice that you forgot. Love is also supposed to feel nourishing. Somewhere along the way, you learned how to endure relationships instead of resting inside them. You became accustomed to emotional tension, accustomed wondering whether someone would pull away, accustomed to carrying the emotional weight of connection by yourself. And when that becomes familiar, peace can almost feel unfamiliar at first. But your heart was never created to live in constant emotional survival mode. I think part of your awakening now is realizing how often you ignored your own intuition just to preserve hope. There were moments when your soul already sensed the truth long before your mind accepted it. You felt the distance. You noticed the inconsistency. You recognized the emotional absence even while someone stood physically beside you. But because you loved deeply, you kept giving chances to people who only offered partial presence. You hoped effort would create clarity. You hoped patience would create security. Yet the more you abandoned your instincts, the more disconnected you became from yourself. And that disconnection is exhausting. A woman can survive heartbreak, but losing trust in her own inner voice wounds her differently. Do you know how many times you silenced your own needs just to keep peace? How many times you accepted less than your heart desired because you feared asking for more would push someone away? You became smaller in places where you deserved to expand. You softened your truth to remain lovable. You convinced yourself that needing reassurance was weakness instead of recognizing it as a natural human longing for emotional safety. But real love does not punish vulnerability. Real love does not disappear when emotions become inconvenient. And the moment you truly understand that, you stop chasing people who only know how to meet you halfway. I think your heart is beginning to understand something important now. You were never difficult to love. You were difficult to manipulate because your soul wanted something genuine. People who only offer inconsistency become uncomfortable around someone who craves depth, honesty, and emotional presence. Your heart kept asking for what was real, and not everyone was capable of providing that. But instead of recognizing their limitations, you often internalized the disappointment as proof that you needed to change yourself. You tried becoming easier, less emotional, less expressive, less vulnerable. Yet every time you abandoned pieces of yourself to maintain connection, your spirit became more tired. There is a certain loneliness that comes from being emotionally intelligent in a world that often is emotional truth. You notice things others ignore. You feel shifts in energy before words are spoken. You sense emotional distance even when someone pretends everything is fine. That sensitivity can become overwhelming because it forces you to carry awareness many people spend their lives avoiding. But your awareness is not a curse. It is part of your wisdom. It is the reason your love feels deep instead of performative. It is the reason people often feel safe with you quickly. Your soul creates emotional shelter for others naturally. The problem was never your ability to love. The problem was that you often extended that love toward people who did not know how to hold it responsibly. And I know there are still moments when grief return unexpectedly. Healing is not linear. Some nights still feel heavier than others. Certain memories still find their way back into your chest without warning. You may hear a familiar song, smell an old perfume lingering somewhere unexpectedly, or sit quietly in your room and suddenly remember the version of yourself who once believed certain people would stay forever. Those moments can feel painfully tender because they remind you not only of who you lost, but of who you were while loving them. Sometimes what hurts most is grieving the hopeful version of yourself that existed before disappointment taught you caution. But even now, after everything, your heart is still capable of becoming soft again. That matters more than you realize. Bitterness may visit you sometimes, but it never fully lives inside you. Deep down, your soul still longs for sincerity. You still believe love should feel safe, warm, emotionally honest. That belief is not weakness. It is evidence that your spirit remains alive beneath the exhaustion. And one day, when the right connection finally enters your life, you will realize why your heart resisted settling for less all along. You were never asking for perfection. You were asking for emotional truth. I think one of the greatest breakthroughs happening inside you now is this. You are beginning to understand that loneliness is not always the absence of people. Sometimes loneliness is being surrounded by people who cannot emotionally meet you. That is why certain relationships felt empty even when you were not physically alone. Your soul craved intimacy beyond conversation. You wanted to feel seen without constantly explaining yourself. You wanted someone who noticed your sadness before you translated it into words. Someone who recognized your strength but understood how tired, strong women become when nobody asks what they need emotionally. And maybe this is the season where you stop apologizing for your depth. Maybe this is the season where you stop viewing your tenderness as something that makes you vulnerable to pain and begin recognizing it as one of the most beautiful parts of who you are. Because despite everything life has done to you, despite all the disappointment, confusion, abandonment, and emotional exhaustion, you still carry warmth. You still care deeply. You still want meaningful connection. That kind of resilience is sacred. So tonight, I hope you let yourself believe in your own worth again. Not because someone validated it, but because your soul deserves peace, whether others recognize your value or not. I hope you stop measuring your lovability by who failed to stay. And I hope you finally understand that the love you have been searching for so desperately must also begin with the way you hold yourself. Not critically, not harshly, but gently, patiently. Like someone worthy of care, you are not too much for the right heart. You never were, and the future waiting for you will not require you to abandon yourself in order to be loved. One day, love will arrive in a form that feels calm instead of confusing, steady instead of uncertain, healing instead of painful. Until then, do not lose faith in the tenderness inside you. It is still leading you somewhere beautiful. Stay with me a little longer, because I think this is the part where your heart begins remembering who you were before the world convinced you that you had to earn love through suffering. For so long, you carried the belief that if you gave enough, sacrificed enough, understood enough, then eventually someone would finally stay in the way your soul deserved. But love was never meant to feel like emotional labor without rest. And I think your spirit has become exhausted from trying to prove your worth to people who benefited from your tenderness without fully valuing it. That exhaustion settled deep inside you, not only in your thoughts, but in your body, your sleep, your silence, your relationship with yourself. There were days when you smiled and continued functionings while privately feeling disconnected from your own joy. I know there were moments when you questioned whether you had become too guarded After enough disappointment, the heart naturally becomes protective. You stopped opening yourself completely because every previous wound taught you how dangerous vulnerability could feel in careless hands. You learned how to observe before trusting. You learned how to withhold pieces of yourself until you felt emotionally safe. And even then, fear still followed you quietly. Fear that someone would eventually change their mind about you. Fear that love would begin beautifully and slowly dissolve into distance again. Fear that no matter how deeply you loved, you would somehow end up emotionally alone once more. Those fears were not irrational. They were turbulent experience. But experiences are not prophecies. Your past may explain your fear, but it does not define your future. There is something important happening inside you now, even if you do not fully recognize it yet. You are beginning to outgrow the version of yourself that accepted inconsistent love simply because you feared emptiness. That growth can feel lonely at first because healing changes what your soul is willing to tolerate. Suddenly, conversations that once satisfied you begin to feel shallow. Now, connections built on uncertainty begin to feel emotionally draining instead of exciting. You no longer crave intensity that leaves you anxious afterward. You crave peace, emotional honesty. Now, you crave someone whose presence does not confuse your nervous system. And that shift is not you becoming boring or emotionally detached. It is you finally recognizing that calm love is healthier than chaotic attachment. Do you know how long your heart has been waiting to feel safe instead of merely desired? Desired is temporary. Desired can disappear the moment convenience changes. But being emotionally safe with someone is entirely different. Safety is knowing you do not have to overanalyze silence. Safety is feeling emotionally considered, even till when life becomes difficult. Safety is not needing to beg for reassurance because consistency already provides it naturally. And I think your soul has spent years starving for that kind of connection. Not grand gestures, not empty promises, just sincerity that remains steady over time. I also think there were parts of yourself you abandoned while trying to survive emotionally difficult seasons. Maybe you stopped doing things that once made you feel alive. Maybe your laughter became quieter. Maybe you stopped dreaming as openly because disappointment made hope feel dangerous. There is a sadness that comes from repeatedly investing your heart into people who only loved portions of you. Eventually, you begin emotionally smaller. But you were never meant to shrink in order to be loved. Connection. The right connection will not require you to silence your emotions, suppress your needs, or pretend you require less care than you actually do. And listen to me carefully here, because this matters deeply. Your worth has never depended on someone's ability to recognize it. Some people encounter extraordinary hearts and still fail to appreciate them because they are emotionally unprepared for depth. That failure belongs to them, not to you. You cannot measure your value through the limitations of emotionally unavailable people. Your tenderness remains beautiful even if it was mishandled. Cheersley, your loyalty remains meaningful even if it was taken for granted. Your love remains rare even if it was not reciprocated correctly. I think one of the most painful things you experience was feeling emotionally unseen while giving so much of yourself. People came to you for comfort, understanding, warmth, advice, patience. You became a safe place for others repeatedly, yet there were nights when you wished someone would notice that you needed comforting too. Strong women often become invisible in this way. The world assumes they are fine because they continue carrying everything gracefully. But strength does not erase emotional needs. Sometimes the strongest hearts are the ones starving most quietly for gentleness. There is still a future version of you waiting beyond this season of healing. A version of you that no longer associates love with anxiety. A version of you that trusts herself again. A version of you that no longer chases unavailable people hoping to finally feel chosen. Instead, she chooses herself first. She protects her peace. She listens to her intuition. She no longer settles for partial affection because she understands her soul deserves fullness. And perhaps most importantly, she stops apologizing for the depth of her heart. That transformation is already beginning inside you. Every painful lesson taught you something valuable about your own emotional needs. You are learning that chemistry alone is not enough. Attraction alone is not enough. Words alone are not enough. Your heart needs alignment between words and actions, between affection and consistency, between promises and presence. You need someone emotionally mature enough to remain steady when life becomes difficult. And one day, when you finally experience that kind of love, you will realize how exhausting uncertainty truly was all along. For now, though, I want you to stop treating yourself like someone who's been left behind by life. You are not late. You are not forgotten. And you are certainly not too damaged to be deflated. Some hearts simply travail through longer seasons of preparation before arriving where they truly belong. Your journey has shaped you into someone wiser, softer in meaningful ways, stronger in healthy ways, and more aware of what your soul genuinely needs. So tonight, I hope you let go of the belief that you must endlessly prove your lovability. I hope you stop carrying responsibility for the emotional limitations of others. And I hope you begin trusting that the same tenderness you have spent your life giving away is something you deserve to receive fully in return. There is still beauty ahead of you. There is still connection ahead of you. There is still a kind of love your nervous system will not have to fight in order to keep. Stay here with me until the end, because I think your heart has carried enough unfinished conversations with itself. For so many years, you searched outside yourself for proof that you were worthy of being loved deeply, safely, consistently. You waited for someone to finally arrive and quiet the fears you carried silently inside your chest. You hoped another person would heal the ache of feeling unseen. But somewhere through all the heartbreak, all the emotional exhaustion, all the nights spent questioning your own value, something remarkable began happening inside you. You started returning to yourself, slowly, carefully, almost without noticing at first. And that return changes everything. I think this is the moment where you finally understand that your life was never defined by who failed to stay. Those departures wounded you, yes. Some of them left scars you still touch quietly in vulnerable moments. But none of them had the power to reduce your worth unless you allowed their inability to love you correctly to become your identity. For too long, you interpreted abandonment as evidence that you were lacking something. Yet the truth was much simpler and far less cruel. Some people encountered your depth before they had developed the emotional maturity to honor it. Some people loved your warmth while lacking the high capacity to sustain genuine intimacy. Some people wanted comfort without commitment, connection without responsibility, closeness without emotional accountability. That confusion belonged to them, not to you. And I know hearing that does not instantly erase the loneliness you carried. There are still memories that ache when they return unexpectedly. There are still parts of your heart that remember waiting for messages that never came, hoping for reassurance that arrived too late, giving chances to people who continued misunderstanding your tenderness. But pain loses its power when you stop turning it into proof of your unworthiness. That is the breakthrough your soul has been moving toward all along. Not becoming emotionless, not becoming detached, becoming free from the belief that your softness was the mistake. Do you realize how extraordinary it is that after everything, you still carry love inside you? Truly think about that. Life disappointed you. People disappointed you. Some experiences changed the way you viewed trust entirely. Yet your heart still longs for sincerity instead of revenge. You still crave meaningful connection instead of shallow distraction. You still believe somewhere deep inside that love should feel safe, peaceful, emotionally honest. That hope surviving inside you is not weakness. It is resilience in its most beautiful form. I think your soul is finally becoming tired of chasing what drains it. You no longer want relationships that require constant emotional guessing. You no longer want affection that disappears when circumstances change. You no longer want to feel emotionally alone while standing beside someone who claims to care about you. Your heart has evolved beyond that now. You are beginning to crave what is real instead of what is merely intense. And there is wisdom in that shift, because intensity can create addiction while peace creates healing. One unsettle your nervous system. The other allows your spirit to rest. There will come a day when you no longer replay old disappointments, trying to understand why things unfolded the way they did. Not because the past becomes meaningless, but because your future finally becomes bigger than your grief. One day you will wake up and realize your heart no longer feels trapped inside old wounds. The memories will still exist, but they will no longer define the way you see yourself. You will stop viewing your life through the lens of loss and begin seeing it through the lens of survival, wisdom, and becoming. And the most beautiful part of your path for transformation is this. You are learning to offer yourself the tenderness you spent years begging others to rob. You are learning to sit with your emotions instead of shaming yourself for them. You are learning that your sensitivity deserves care, not criticism. You are learning that rest is not weakness, that boundaries are not cruelty, that protecting your peace is not selfishness. These lessons may seem small, but they rebuild a woman from the inside out. I know there were times you feared becoming invisible with age, feared that life had already passed the moment where deep love was meant to find you. But love is not reserved only for certain timelines or certain versions of beauty. The kind of connection your soul longs for grows from emotional truth, not superficial perfection. And your heart has become richer through everything it survived. Wiser, more compassionate, more capable of recognizing what actually matters. The future is not closing around you. It is opening in ways you cannot yet fully see. One day, someone will meet the version of you that no longer apologizes for feeling deeply. They will meet a woman who understands her worth without arrogance, who protects her peace without guilt, who loves sincerely without abandoning herself in the process. And that love will feel different from what came before. Not confusing, not unstable, not emotionally exhausting. It will feel calm, honest, gradual, not a constantly wonder whether you are wanted, because their presence will already answer that question naturally. You will not need to shrink yourself to remain lovable, because the right heart will never ask you to become smaller. But even before that love arrives, I need you to understand something important. Your life is already meaningful now. You are already whole now. Another person is not the missing piece that completes your existence. Love should add warmth to your life, not determine whether your soul deserves peace. And perhaps that is the final lesson your heart needed to learn. That you were never incomplete simply because you were lonely sometimes. Human hearts ache for connection naturally. That longing does not make you weak, it makes you alive. So tonight, as this journey comes gently to rest, I want you to release the old story that told you your tenderness was a burden. Release the belief that you must overgive in order to be chosen. Release the fear that your deepest days are behind you. Your story is not ending here. In many ways, it is only now becoming honest. Only now becoming aligned with the truth your soul has carried quietly all along. You are a woman who survived disappointment without losing the ability to love. You are a woman who kept warmth inside her heart even after walking through emotional winters. You are a woman whose depth was never too much for the right people, only too real for the wrong ones. And one day, you will look back at this version of yourself with immense tenderness because you will finally understand how hard she fought just to keep believing in love at all. Until then, please remember this. You are not forgotten by life. You are not unseen. And you are not alone in your becoming. There is still beauty ahead of you. There is still peace ahead of you. There is still love ahead of you that will feel like arriving home after the years of wandering emotionally through places that never truly held your heart.